fintech talk, so we've got to have some technology that I'm sure will work flawlessly. If you scan the QR code down here, then you'll be able to use an online service called 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and you can write questions, and at the end I can go through them. So it's a little bit more structured than the kind of hands up at the end kind of thing. There's also going to be audience participation throughout, which I'm sure everyone, that won't have just filled you with dread. But that will be through 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 as well. So my talk's how green is your fintech? At Zeti, we should kind of know that reasonably well, as we are a green fintech. So I'm going to take you through kind of introductions to myself and Zeti. How can you measure how green a fintech is? Like, what does that even really mean? How can you make a difference? Particularly, actually, let's have a little quick survey by hand rather than 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. Who here works in technology, actually building writes code regularly? Cool. Okay, so about half. And then who is kind of more business kind of facing? Cool. So how can you make a difference as a developer, but also there's bits around how you can make a difference as a fintech, the unique role that fintechs kind of play in the economy, and how they can influence kind of green policy. And then kind of conclusions. So first of all, me, that, if you recognise the brickwork, is taken around the corner from here, because that's where our office is. I'm CTO and co-founder at Zeti. I've authored 2 books on serverless architectures on Azure, and unsurprisingly, that means that most of Zeti's tech is on Azure Serverless. Previously worked for Energy Investments, which, unless you're a massive fan of 𝗙𝗶𝘁𝗶𝗏𝗏, you're unlikely to have heard of, but they are quite a big investments house in London, across Europe really. So, Zeti, we had a little intro there, but go again. So we're a fintech, we finance clean vehicles on a pay-per-mile basis. So that's, instead of having fixed monthly payments, you have a payment of a certain cost per mile. That's really attractive to businesses. We're more aimed at businesses than individuals. So say if you're a taxi driver and COVID happens, which is exactly what happened very, very shortly after we launched our product, instead of having to pay a bunch of money for a bit of steel that's sat on your driveway because you're not allowed to drive it, instead you pay nothing whilst you're not using it. And then when you can make more money again, when there's a bit of a COVID boom afterwards in terms of lots of travel, you can then pay off your financing. So the model really helps with that kind of flexibility, and there's a lot of transparency because of the way that we have to track the vehicles to get mileage. We can also track a lot of stuff around air pollution and carbon savings, and that kind of sparked me off when thinking about all of this kind of stuff, like how do we score how green fintech is, and entire stuff is serverless. So how green is something? It's not the most thrilling topic in the world, but the key way to kind of score how green something is you need to go to the UN Sustainability Goals. So those are, there's 17 of them. If you have a particularly wet evening and you want to go and research this, you can go and look at all of them. But the key ones that I think fintech can particularly apply to and technology can apply to is obviously climate action. Building resilient infrastructure, so if you're financing stuff, green finance is really, really important for sustainable development. And then sustainable cities and communities, Zeti, for example, helps a lot with that by taking air polluting cars off the roads and replacing them with electric ones. So if you're looking at any kind of pollution, but particularly carbon, that's the main kind of headline topic, with good reason. There's different scopes. And these are important to understand because when you're thinking about, how do I say how green my application is or how green is my fintech? You could be, and in fact, this happened in the early days of kind of greenwashing. You could say, well, I dig all this oil out of the ground, but I don't burn any of it. I give it to someone else. They might burn it. They might store it in a tank. So therefore, my emissions are nothing. Not true. So we invented, as part of the kind of UN kind of framework on sorting out carbon emissions. There's 3 scopes. You have 1, 2, and 3. What you do is 1, so that's what you directly emit. So let's say you're a sales company and your employees drive their cars, to go to different meetings. Emissions from those cars, that's scope 1. Number 2, your employees drive home, that's scope 2. So if you've ever worked somewhere and they do this survey every year, whether do you cycle to work or do you take the train to work, all that kind of, has anyone had that survey? That's why. Because they get scored on whether you drive to work or cycle to work or take the train to work. And it actually has a big impact on their finances and things like that now, because lots of companies are scored on their environmental credentials. And then what your suppliers/customers do. So this one's hard, really, for a lot of companies, because they don't work for you, so you have a limited ability to force them to kind of change their ways. But as a developer, how can you measure your impact? So I've got some QR codes here. These aren't Slido QR codes, these are useful websites that I think are useful for each point. So feel free to scan those and take a look. But one of the most immediate things you can do is see, right, is my website for my company at the moment, is that hosted on green technology? And this website up here will tell you. Sometimes it doesn't know, it's the internet, technology doesn't always work, but generally it's pretty good. And then we've also got how efficient is your code. So there's, sorry, I'm blocking your QR codes there, apologies. You can go onto this website, and what that will do is actually look at how much carbon does a visitor to your website emit, which I think is quite an interesting kind of topic. So not often kind of thought about, but if you're sending, when someone goes onto your website, you're sending loads and loads of high resolution videos by default. So, every time they go on it, they don't have a choice about downloading, they just download every time. That is taking loads of bandwidth, which takes servers, which uses up a lot of energy. But also their actual mobile battery is depleted a lot. And that battery, at the moment in the UK, is powered mostly by gas. So there's a lot of carbon emissions that just come from that. How green is your data center /power provider? So you can look this up. This one is a bit harder. I tried to find like a nice, just go onto here and there's like a comparison site or whatever. This one you've actually got to do, some of your own work, unfortunately. There's some regions of different cloud providers which are powered by 100% green electricity. There's, as a top tip, generally, the further towards the poles your cloud center is, the better it's going to be. The reason for that is that the cooling is a lot cheaper. It doesn't require as much energy to cool the data center if it's already cold outside. Some of the ones in more kind of equatorial areas have surprisingly high carbon footprints, even if they're actually on green energy. It's a bit of a weird thing, but and then how's your application architected? So this is a self-plug, it's to my blog. I think how is your application architected can be a very interesting sort of thing to look up, to kind of analyse how much your emissions are. And then how can you make a difference? So if you're a developer or a business person in a company, what's the, you can't necessarily always do I co-founded the thing, I wrote the whole software, so I can just change everything. Not everyone can just do that. So what can you do as a more kind of mid-level or developer level or DevOps person or a person inside a larger machine, if you like? Well, when you're architecting new things, you can do them cloud native. So this, I want to say you should take this with a pinch of salt, because I put it here. It's from AWS, so obviously they're going to have a slight interest in telling you that cloud infrastructure is more sustainable than your own tin. These kind of rough figures on, it's not out of the realms of possibility, basically, these kind of figures. if you think about it, a big company that's dedicated to cloud infrastructure is going to focus on running things as efficiently as possible because it makes them millions if they cut 1% off the energy usage of the data center. So they're spending millions and billions on making things as efficiently as possible. Your average data center that's run by a company on its own, you just don't have that budget, you don't have that focus on efficiency, most often, and there are obviously always exceptions. You can make new features more efficient. Now, that doesn't just mean, let's write everything in C++ and not do a single, not use a single language feature that makes it easier to write or anything like that. There's a lot of other ways that you can make things more efficient. And you can refactor old code for efficiency boosts. On Slido, I don't know if you want to think about, ways perhaps that you can make a difference, or suggest ways that you think might reduce carbon emissions of an app that you know. It might be one that you've built, or it might be one that you know of in the public domain that you think, this is really, really wasteful, or something like that. So go ahead if you want to on the Slido thing and suggest the things that you can make, reduce carbon emissions from your own applications. So, some of my ideas as to what these kind of mean is, if you're architecting new things for cloud native, quite a lot of, if you're using like a cloud service, rather than spinning up, a web app on a bunch of virtual machines to make it as close to your on-premise data center as possible, and then spin up a whole bunch of virtual machines running some kind of 𝗙𝗂𝗿 database, your flavor may vary. Then why not instead host your app on platform as a service, auto-scaling? That will be substantially more efficient. You'll lose a lot less tin. And the main thing here that's really important is that if you put something on something that's not auto-scaling, then what the cloud provider has to do, even if it's cloud, is has to budget and basically run that server at much less than max capacity, because you've paid for a certain amount of memory and a certain amount of CPU. So they have to keep it available because you're expecting it to, if suddenly you get a load of visitors, they're expecting to be able to, you to be able to use it. And what that does is basically create a lot of waste. They spent a bunch of money on tin and it's sat there not working. And that money and that embedded carbon is now being essentially assigned to you. Whereas if you use something that's more kind of, as you get more demand, it increases, you're reducing that overhead of your service basically taking a big chunk of tin and rendering it useless by sitting there at 2% capacity. And then, because I'm a serverless person at heart, instead of doing MVC, don't, and instead use a front-end framework, serverless functions and NoSQL for backend, your life will be better in every way, but it'll also be a lot more efficient. Oh, to give an idea of how much more efficient, if you saw the QR code from before, that's a plug from my blog, I cut the cost of an MVC like classic ASP.NET, like 𝗧𝗶𝗁𝗏, 97% by taking it from this model to this model. So not even on that. I don't know how much that would cost, lots. So just from going to that is 97% of cost. And when you're hosting something already on the cloud, cost is a pretty good standard metric for carbon, because what they're charging you for is the rent effectively on the tin and the electricity that's going into the tin, and then they're making a big markup on it, obviously. Now, if you're already paying the markup, then if you reduce your cost by a substantial amount, you have probably reduced your carbon by a substantial amount. It's not always easy to get total honesty out of cloud providers about how much carbon you're already using. Azure's pretty good. They've got like a Power BI kind of thing where you can go in and see like, this is how much carbon this specific service that I've used produced and things like that. And obviously Google's pretty good. AWS, a little bit more patchy, to be honest. But generally, it can be a little bit more tricky. So cost is a pretty decent kind of metric. And then making new features more efficient. So this is more on an architecture side. So if you're architecting a new feature, you might instinctively think, right, I'm going to poll this thing to see if it's changed. I want to see, every 3 minutes, I want to see, has this changed? If it has, I'm going to go off and do some work. Everyone's done something like that at some point in a development workflow. So instead, why not actually use the event-driven systems that you hear about in conferences all the time? They work, they're great. And they save a vast amount of kind of carbon and waste because you're not paying a carbon cost and electricity cost for something to just sit there polling for no reason. They can run for years, and the amount of over time those tiny little amounts add up to big amounts. So refactoring old code for efficiency boost. So this one's a little bit more focused on like conventional web development, I guess. So I'm definitely guilty of this. I'm sure everyone is. Where you do a new project and you just kind of go, whatever came with it, that'll be fine, and we'll just leave it and run it as that's what it's going to be, and that's what it stays forever. It never changes. Everyone's terrified to change any of their settings because if they change any of their settings, the web app might break. So instead of doing that, why not go in and use a tool like Lighthouse? Does anyone know what Lighthouse is? Awesome. What is it?
It's basically a performance tool for the web and mobile.
Yeah. So if you go into Google Chrome, it's built in. So you just open up the developer tab, look for Lighthouse, it's in there, and it will both shatter your ego and blow your mind, probably, which is certainly what it did for me the first time I used it. It goes in and it basically loads up your application and goes, look, you've done all of these things that are really slow. You've not zipped up your images, so your images are 5 times as large as they need to be. It's mostly focused on performance, like that's kind of its core, but it's great for accessibility as well. And it's just a really good way of just going in and being like, look at all these low-hanging fruit. I can just go in and say, right, instead of having the web server just serving up PNGs or JPEGs or whatever, let's use the most modern image format. It costs you nothing, but actually saves you a bunch of money, particularly if you're running a very big website, you'll actually see the saving in cost. I should say as well, a lot of the great things about this is that traditionally, developers and kind of the accounts team, if you like, don't always see eye to eye. The developers want to spend more money on fancier new services, and the accounts team or the finance team are like, no, we have budgets. The good thing about this is that you're both going to be linked up and fighting on the same side, which is refreshing. Certainly was at M&G. And then, just because I love Lighthouse, I thought I'd put it in again. But you can also use Lighthouse as a build step. So if you're doing like a DevOps pipeline, I think I mentioned to some guys earlier, there's like DevOps pipelines where you can do automated security scanning, like where it actually tries to attack your website and files GitHub issues. We also have this kind of thing where basically if the performance score drops below 80, it fails to build. Or if your accessibility score drops below whatever you want, you can fail to build as well. So that's very helpful because otherwise, these things, you spend 3 weeks on them, put loads of work into it, 6 months later, bad habits have crept back in, you're all back to where you started. So these are definitely good ways of making sure that you stick to these new efficiency kind of improvements. And how can Fintech companies impact sustainability? And again, any ideas that you've got or anything that you want to put, go and put it in the Slido. So this is actually something that Zeti's got. To all of our customers who have financed vehicles with us, we show exactly how much carbon and NOx they've saved from each vehicle. They can split it down to each one. They can even see, I haven't got it there, it's our business development guy's favourite thing, which is a map of the NOx around the city that we've saved, so you can literally see individual streets where we've saved like more or less. But yeah, measure your own emissions and show them to your customers. So 𝗴𝗿𝗲𝗏 is a great example of that. They have a whole bunch of things where they say, it costs, we emit this much carbon, so therefore you put in this payment with us has emitted a small amount of carbon, and it's just that kind of transparency, being open. Then obviously in fintech, you're providing financial services, and those financial services are very valuable, otherwise people wouldn't invest money in them and you wouldn't work in. So you can provide schemes specifically for green firms. So that's kind of Zeti's whole business, if you like. But it doesn't have to be. You can just launch a scheme that's like, maybe you get early access to new features if you're doing it for kind of a green reason, or preferential pricing, or whatever. Big thing you can also do is help them measure. So that's really what we're doing there, is allowing them to measure their emission savings. So that's kind of depends on exactly what your tech role is, right, as to how much you're going to be able to do that. And then nudging your customers into green choices. So there's a really great company that we were on one of the startup programs with, which basically shows the carbon emissions from your spending from your bank. So every time you make a transaction, it will basically say, right, what were the revenues of that company, what was its emissions, you took up 0.1% of their their revenues, so therefore you contributed in this way. And that kind of stuff is really helpful, because you're kind of nudging your customer to kind of go like, do you really want to kind of put money into this company that's really, really bad, or do you want to kind of look at another one? And nudging can obviously take stronger and stronger forms depending on how bold you are from a UX point of view. So yeah, so in conclusion, developers can have a massive impact. I think the amount of carbon that you can save just through architecting things differently and thinking a little bit more differently when you're doing development is huge. One of the things to remember is, like, when you build a system, it can live for 15 years. It can live for even longer than that, depending on what industry you're in. If you make bad choices at the start, that's just gonna keep paying carbon into the atmosphere. Whereas if you take a few tweaks, they don't have to be big. You can really, really reduce that. And the great thing about it as well is, with so much attention on sustainability, you can definitely get in touch with other people in your company and say, look, we're trying to do this. Like, we can get marketing about it and like all of that kind of stuff. So you kind of get buy-in in a way that you're not likely to get if you say to your product manager, oh, I'm doing some efficiency work this week. We're like, I don't care about efficient, I need a new feature. This in a way will be a new feature, if you like. And yeah, I think fintech definitely has a unique position to encourage change. Because we're that link between these companies and their goals, and between consumers and their goals, you can really you don't have to be a green company specifically to be doing, just small nudges and things that can really help. And this is a major one for me, is that people think, well, it's not going to make that much of a difference. It's not worth the effort. As a business, we've got this big, horrible, like, oil giant as a customer. So even if I do really good things with this other customer, it's not going to matter. That is, to me, defeatist. It's best to just at least try and make progress. And as with all like startups and fintech and stuff, those small steps of progress then suddenly snowball into these massive kind of things. And before you know it, maybe your biggest division is kind of green finance or whatever. So any questions? I'm potentially using the Slido, I guess, for that. Unless anyone's got any extra ones that they want to ask. Go ahead.
I tried to put it in the slide, but it's a nightmare to try to reduce the number of characters. After the So my question here is a little bit based on your experience with Serverless. So one thing I'm facing today is we are actually trying to build sync the eligibility form with actually the account creation. So what we have to do is we have to actually store in one service the information, because it's PII, to actually dial into the default, and force to generate an event that will be listened by the authorization part, and actually store as well data to actually know when you have to do the check, because there is no synchronous communication between both services.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is, in my opinion, we are creating waste because we are storing in both places similar information.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you solve that problem?
Well, that's a very good question. So obviously not knowing your specific code base and all this kind of stuff, your mileage may vary, all of that kind of thing. So in terms of synchronizing two data sources, like particularly like that, there's a few different approaches that you can use. So one of the things that I've seen that can kind of work pretty well is on my experience is with Azure. So unfortunately, sometimes that means that I give examples that are Azure, not everyone knows what they are. So I'll try and convert into AWS language as well. So things like 𝗏𝗁𝗲, for example, have things where you can basically share the object over multiple regions between different different services, and you can just operate off that. Durable functions has a thing called durable entities, which is quite a powerful kind of way of storing that kind of stuff where it only needs to be in one place at one time. There's various kind of network restrictions and stuff that you can put on all of those kind of, particularly if you're sensitive around PII. So yeah, there's a few different things. It's a little bit hard to actually, fully solve on stage, but it's, is that all right?
Yeah, no, it's actually quite aligned with your talk in the sense that I feel that it's really difficult to actually try to minimize and become brilliant in terms of ways, because a certain architectural patterns force us into actually create more ways because of the way they are architectural.
Yes, and that's very true. I mean, and I guess the core question is whether the application will do what you need it to do without that pattern, or whether you just need to say, we need to do it this way. So we should treat this as baseline, and everything is an improvement on top. Things where there's like an architectural pattern that is just quite wasteful or whatever. Like if for security reasons you just don't have a choice. A great example, right? HTTPS, DNS encrypting of websites, waste lots of carbon because your phone. And when I say waste, I'm using it in a very loose term. It's not waste for the reason afterwards. But your phone is basically continuously decrypting and encrypting, which is quite an expensive process. Lots and lots of data, because we now say everything has to be HTTPS, everything has to be DNS secured. But the fact is the internet wouldn't work basically without it the way that we use it now. So you just have to treat that really as a baseline. Anything you can do to improve it and increment on it is great, but fundamentally, you have to have it. So I think that's kind of would be my answer.
Definitely, we haven't done this line. Thank you very much for listening.
No worries. Cool. So we have some kind of questions. Is the Zeti platform 100% serverless? Virtually yes. We do have a couple of fixed services. I did try and get rid of them, but they do still carry on. So if you try and do antivirus scanning on a cloud, it's really painful. I don't know if anyone's tried to do that, but basically ended up having to host a container to put the antivirus in, and it worked that way. There was no way to serverlessly host it. I didn't really want to become like a third party, sending all our files over API to a random company that I don't know. Drawbacks being a serverless first company, yes, there's definitely some problems. You pay way more attention to cold starts than you ever thought possible. So you do have to do kind of engineering work on that side. I guess my own contesting to my own point is there's a lot of work that you're not doing, basically. So one of the things I didn't talk about too much in there, but the team size that you need to manage a serverless system is tiny. Our development team is 3 people, and we haven't showed the whole platform yet, but it's quite a large platform. And we don't have any dedicated support staff, so it's literally 3 developers, and we run the whole thing. A lot of that is because it's serverless. We don't have to manage clusters. We don't have to, we just don't need to do all of that thing because it's all done for us. So those are quite big benefits, particularly in terms of building a startup from nothing to where we are now, because I've not spent a load of time doing kind of platform engineering and things like that. Why is Azure over AWS? So the real core reason Azure over AWS is because I knew Azure and I was starting the company. So basically what I wasn't going to do was go and try and learn a whole new cloud platform while starting a new company as well. Thought that was probably unwise. It was already enough work trying to build a new company. But they have a lot of other benefits as well. So generally speaking, I mean, AWS has definitely improved, but generally speaking, like Google and Azure are generally pretty good for environmental stuff, and AWS does tend to lag a little bit. They have improved their commitments recently though to zero carbon energy. And then 𝗴𝗿𝗲𝗶𝘁𝗶𝗿. The big part actually was cost when we were starting. So, you know, the system ran with absolutely, you know, I can't remember what, I think I've still got our first bill somewhere. I think it was £30 after coming off the free stuff that you get from Microsoft. So our entire cloud bill for the entire platform was 30 quid. And that was, oh, hello. Trying to authenticate the user. I don't think you need to do that right now, do you? So yeah, so that's the serverless side more than the Azure side. So if you go on AWS, for example, like you just use Lambda and you just use S3 buckets, you'll end up with a similar situation. So yeah, so that's a massive benefit. What is your services use? Yeah, so we use Cosmos DB in serverless mode. We use Azure Static Web Apps, so every single Zeti hub kind of, you know, the thing that we took the screenshot from, that customers log into, they are all hosted on Azure Static Web Apps. Great service, really easy to use for setting up like your own hobby websites because it's free and it has a back end with it. We also use Redis cache. That's the other thing that isn't fully serverless. You have to have Redis cache kind of running semi-permanently, so you actually have to pay monthly for that. Advantages, disadvantages. It's an interesting one. There's well, the bigger like advantages is obviously global reach. Like, but you're not going to say that over other cloud providers. I mean, other cloud providers do that too. But for us, for example, when we set up the US office, it was like, oh, I just, you know, spin up a new region. My HTML and CSS is now there, so they get really great latency. So that's pretty good. And then disadvantages. It's kind of hard to say. Like when you're going through stuff and you're using cloud services, you will always hit into problems. There'll always be things that you're kind of using that don't work and that you get frustrated with. But I wouldn't say it's massively different to kind of any other. I don't think. Then, what are your main milestones for business in the next 6 to 12 months? So growth, we've just raised 5 million in Series A, and that's with a company behind green hydrogen. So we're looking at really kind of growing our financing of green hydrogen vehicles and assets, particularly the man behind the funding is 𝗴𝗿𝗶𝘁𝗶𝗿, which is the person at the heir to the 𝗴𝗶𝘂𝗂𝗿 kind of fortune. So, you know, there's potential kind of in those kind of areas, and really just kind of growing how much we're financing and growing our software-only business as well. So for investment funds who want to get into financing clean assets, don't necessarily want to use our financing, but want to use the software that we use to make it so efficient, we offer a service for them where they can just use the software. By the way, if anyone feels that I haven't answered that question fully and has a follow-up question, I don't know, I guess put your hand up and scream.
Just one different question, like,
sure.
Suppose if your business grows very rapidly and you have millions of users, then are you not worried about the cost because you're using serverless and you're stuck with Azure? You have no options.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, that's a really good question. So just in case not everyone heard it, you know, if we grow really big, which would you be worried about your costs exploding because you're using serverless and it's all pay as you use? Yes and no. So I pay close attention to costs because I know that the service will just scale, which is great because it means that I don't have to interfere with it. But it does also mean that you need to watch the billing kind of side of it. We actually had something recently where we brought on 3,500 vehicles onto the platform in one go. And then I was kind of watching the bill like a hawk. So you definitely do kind of pay more attention to it. But then equally on the flip side of that, instead you'd be watching for outages. If you weren't, you know, whilst you're paying more, you're not watching out for customers saying I can't log in because your server's crashed because you've got too many visitors. So there's kind of a flip side there. And then the other kind of thing is, as you get to like a very large scale, you'd be pre-purchasing. You know, you'd be saying, right, I'm going to purchase, 2 million units of whatever, I think it's 𝗴𝗿𝗶𝘁𝗂𝗿 or something that you charge as your functions in. So you pre-purchase and do things like that, probably. And that's certainly what M&G did. So, I think the key thing is to let the business come first and the cost worry kind of come afterwards. You see what I mean? Like, it's better to have the business grow and then generate the revenue to pay the bill. Now, obviously, you can still put caps on it and everything. So you can still cap serverless services and say, right, I don't want to spend more than this amount. That's particularly relevant if you've got it on your personal credit card. That's what I've definitely done, like no more than £5, please. But yeah, is that all right? Awesome. I don't know how many more questions you want me to go through, or whether you want me to.
If you can answer like a few, if there's a few, just whoever raised their hands, and then
yeah,
that'd be all right.
I have one question. I wonder, as engineers, when we create an architecture as a team, if it works, okay, let's go on. In terms of cost, if it is not that much expensive, we can say, okay, let's confirm. If the manager says, okay, we can continue. But I wonder in your company, is there someone speak up like, is this really enough green this architecture, or should we change? Someone can speak up in the daily meetings. Okay, we have that, it works, but it's not green that much, or should we change the services? So how do you do, or do you have any?
Yeah, something. So if you're looking at like particularly new services, it's definitely something we do with like, if we're looking at like both a new business service and a new technology service, they're kind of similar in many ways, right? And definitely look at their kind of carbon commitments and like all of that kind of stuff. When you're looking at kind of new architectures, it's definitely something that gets brought up, but admittedly we don't normally capture it in carbon. We normally just think, is this wasteful? That's kind of like this architecture that we're thinking out, is it just a bit wasteful? Let's try and make it not wasteful. But yeah, it's something we definitely think about on a regular basis. And it's one of the weird benefits of the serverless thing is is it wasteful? Yes, it costs us more money. Well, let's not do that, right? Whereas a lot of costs can get hidden when you're on constantly hosted stuff. Awesome.
So a lot of founders are worried about vendor lock-in. I'm guessing you've just discarded that completely, right? Do you think that's better for your business?
Yeah, basically. The trying to stay vendor agnostic in the world of cloud is a very good way of spending millions of pounds running in the same location, pretty much. I do think there's definitely a place for it for certain things. If you're in a situation where you're running, I don't know, a system that coordinates fighter jets, and if it goes down, you're toast, national security's toast, then yeah, probably run it on multiple clouds and spend all that money, right? But the reality is that there's a lot of competition between cloud providers. The main concern of vendor lock-in is them suddenly turning up the prices. If anything, they've turned down the prices over time. One of the side benefits of the Azure way of doing it is actually Azure Functions itself is open source, and you can run Azure Functions on Kubernetes any way you like. That's not to say that it would be a peaceful and easy transition for our team to move off Azure, because we use lots of other stuff. But yeah, my general approach is basically disregard it. If we really needed to run something on the cloud, we'd put a load of engineering work into making it happen. But for the moment, yeah, we just don't worry about it too much. Hope it doesn't get too expensive. Is that right? Awesome.
Do you have a view on how the cloud providers are going to compete using sustainability as leading anyway? In the next 5-10 years, so it's going to be huge, and you can see C-suite people are saying, no, we're going to use the most eco-friendly platform.
Yeah, and I think where that's going to get really interesting is when it hits up against the vendor lock-in from previously, when when a CEO goes to a conference and says, "Oh, this cloud provider it's really green. We should switch everything to it," and all the IT team go, "No, we've got everything on this thing. Please don't." Yeah, I think they'll compete on it. So we, for transparency, we're in a Microsoft sustainability advert as Zeti. They are very heavily marketing themselves as the more sustainable kind of cloud. Google do that a lot as well, because they've got a great history with sustainability. Again, the previous, as I spoke about, Amazon is not so strong. I do think they're going to market very heavily on it. I think it's going to be interesting to see how much actually wins contracts for the reasons I mentioned before. If people are already locked in, then probably probably not going to switch just based purely. What you're more likely to do is call up your cloud provider and go, or whenever you have your regular meeting with your representative and say, well, Azure is 100% renewable energy, like all this kind of stuff. Like, what's going on, guys? Like, we need this to be the same.
Like usage is like the main thing on the price. So it's not really in their interest to scale back services based on being like optimizing things. Presumably they've all got the same cooling capabilities. Technology's not rapidly changing whether they're doing more cooling and all this sort of stuff. But presumably that's the same. So are they going to have to fight over turning down the usage, optimizing that to reduce carbon?
Yeah, it is a little bit of an ironic thing. I've obviously have a regular meeting with my Microsoft person who kind of looks after our account, and they're like, oh, your usage has gone down again this month. It's like, yeah, I'm very proud of it. And the more kind of maybe we'll leave that for a moment anyway. The more kind of strategic account managers are like, it doesn't matter. It's a good thing that they're getting more out of the product for less. They're happier. They're going to be stickier, and they're more likely to stick with us. Obviously, perhaps more short-termism view is like they're spending less money. Let's get them to spend more money. So there's definitely a kind of tension there. But generally, from I speak at a few like serverless events and things like that. Like most of the account managers are more on the strategic view. They're like, yeah, you save more now, but then in future, like your services are more efficient, your usage is going to go up, your bills are going to go up. So there is definitely a tension, but I think their kind of thing is. You'll use this more in the end anyway.
Last one.
Yeah. Sorry.
Staying within the topic of the presentation, do you guys do any demand shaping and demand shifting and results in those activities?
So we don't really need to. We kind of just, whenever a user logs on, it spins up what it needs, and we've never really had a reason, there's never really been a need to kind of do that kind of thing. We did have to, my previous employer, MG, like there was a certain amount of like making sure that there weren't too many users on, or that we were using, if we could shift our email communications to different hours of the day to try and manage when people are on and stuff like that. But one of the big benefits of serverless basically is you don't need to do that, just set it whenever you need to and it will spin up enough code capacity.
Good stuff.